we cannot lead a company. We cannot lead a team if we have reactionary experiences happening in ourselves that we can't control. It turns on the gene of inflammation in our bodies. Inflammation is the root cause of cancers.
Welcome to the Be Better broadcast. We have a treat for you today. We have a second-time guest to the Be Better broadcast. His name is Gary DeRodrigez. Gary was on the Be Better broadcast last October. It's been almost a year since he's been on. And last time we had an incredible conversation about this concept of human excellence and how to become the best version of yourself. Gary has been working on a lot of great stuff since we talked last. And for those who don't know Gary, he is the CEO of Peopleistic LLC USA. He's known as the People Mechanic, and he is recognized as an international expert in the science of human excellence. He is a published author on leadership through Bloomsbury Publishing, and he actually just completed a new book on trauma, as well as a certification course when it comes to trauma. He has designed effective models of psychology-based systems for relationship success, human behavior, communication, team dynamics into an eloquent system that transforms individuals and organizational culture at lightning speed. Today, we're going to talk all about how you can cultivate strong and incredible relationships in your life. And I'm so excited for you to hear this from Gary. When you take away even just one thing from this conversation, all that we ask is you share this show with just one other person who could use it as well. You are the reason the Be Better broadcast has grown to over 300 episodes over the past 2 years, because you are the best part of the Be Better team. Without further ado, the man himself. It has been quite a while. Gary, it's great to have you on the show, sir.
Hey, Brandon, I'm sneaking in with just a fresh glass of water just for that.
Perfect timing.
It's really good to see you.
It's good to see you too. I know you've been working on a lot of great things. Can you give us maybe a snapshot on what the last year has looked like for you when it comes to the entire landscape of human excellence and communication and trauma that you focus on?
Yeah, it's been huge, actually. I got quite ill in 2020. I had to have some medical procedures done, which was a little terrifying. But what I realized was, I kept saying to myself, well, if I die, would I be satisfied with what I've accomplished in my life so far? And the answer was no. And I thought, well, why is that? And I thought, well, I'm sitting on this piece of information around how to resolve trauma that I discovered through quite by accident, but on stage bombing in front of about 500 psychotherapists. And then I amalgamized all kinds of different techniques on the fly, and it worked like a hot knife through butter. And I went home and I wrote it all out. I realized I haven't trained enough people in this system. So this year has been about launching trainings and certifications in that system so I can start training coaches and consultants and psychotherapists in how to resolve trauma. It is literally epidemic, and it is at the root cause of how we halt our relationships, how we stop our own selves in really excelling, how we have lack of control emotionally, how addictions will override us, how illnesses are contributed to by unresolved trauma. So when I started looking at it, I got blown away thinking that what really has to happen in therapy, in coaching, because coaching generally works on the behavioral level, but rarely do we go to the root cause. And the root cause is always these quiet but silent haunting voices from our past, projecting into our future and stopping us from being as good and as best and as successful as we can be. People carry around the luggage of their past in such a way that clouds their future. They sometimes can't even see it. So wow. I've set out to now be able to teach as many people as I possibly can on how to resolve trauma. The system resolves trauma, and this is not a joke. It's not puffing. It resolves trauma in anywhere from 10 minutes to 30 minutes, and the change is permanent.
Wow.
Permanent.
Lifetime traumas can be resolved in 10 to 30 minutes is what you're saying.
Yep.
Absolutely unbelievable. I want to ask you about that. And I'm curious, we talked before we recorded this idea of trauma. We carry it through our lives. I'm assuming that there's times where we don't even recognize that this trauma is present. Is that correct?
Most people are like a frog in a slow boiling pot. The frog stays in the pot because it doesn't realize how hot it's getting, because it adapts to the pain, and eventually it dies.
Wow.
So most of us, we've adapted to the pain that we carry, but we're not aware of why these symptomologies are happening to us. Sometimes we'll create disease. Now, let me just go to that for just a minute. When we're carrying unresolved trauma, what actually happens is that we have the stress hormones of cortisol and adrenaline dumping into our body on a consistent basis. We have hypervigilance occurring all the time as we walk outside. We have fears just about our normal everyday existence. This is an example of trauma. We have problems in connecting to people. We have problems in our communications, in our relationships. So what all this does is it turns on the gene of inflammation in our bodies. Inflammation is the root cause of cancers and of all the major diseases. They have tracked back unresolved trauma to the cause of cancers, diabetes, lung disease, heart disease, and the list just goes on and on. Diabetes is literally the disease. The psycho-emotional component of diabetes is endless hopelessness.
Whoa.
So if you look at the indigenous cultures of our world, the Native American culture, the Aboriginal cultures, those are cultures that were invaded and their lands taken from them. And the inhumanity to those particular groups of people, what the Native people believe is that their ancestors live in the DNA of their body. And as far as I'm concerned, in my belief system, that is absolutely true. I was on the Rickraw Nation reservation once, and there's so few left of the Rickraw Nation, and about 3/4 of them all have diabetes. And I asked this one elder, I said, why is there so much diabetes on the reservation? And he said, because we feel the presence of the sorrow and the inhumanity that happened to our ancestors in our bodies. We cannot not feel their pain. And so we live in a world that we feel not only our pain and our adaptation, but we feel our ancestors as well. So diabetes is hopelessness and endless sorrow. So we have to start looking at, there is an absolute connection between the psycho-emotional condition of an individual and their physiology. The body and the mind are intrinsically connected. So what we have to look at then, especially if we're going to look at even leadership, we cannot lead a company, we cannot lead a team if we have reactionary experiences happening in ourselves that we can't control. Because when we get triggered, we go into fight, flight, or freeze. None of those responses is worthy of a leadership position. We have to be able to have psycho-emotional control. And I don't mean control like control, but peace. Our nervous system has to be calmed, because people follow you because they trust you. They trust you because you have consistent and congruent behavior. You cannot have consistent and congruent behavior if you do not have consistent and congruent emotional states. Emotions are a construct based upon the complexity of our thinking. And our thinking is based on how we filtered our collective experiences. And if we're dragging behind us lots of references from our past that are loaded with unresolved emotional states, then how resourceful are you going to be in the now?
Yes.
You're not going to be. You're going to be reactive. You'll be projective. You'll go into victim. You'll put up shields. You'll attack. You'll do all those things that are the opposite of leadership. Most leadership trainings never dive deep enough. They don't go to the root cause. They look at behavior and they give you clips of how you should be, but never address what is the emotional root cause of why you can't be that or why you are not that. What I'm talking about is a whole revolution of deep dive root cause leadership trainings that actually begin to resolve the issues at that person's deepest level, and it can be done content free.
I've spoken to a lot of leadership experts, and I've been a part of dozens of leadership trainings, and nobody except you talks about this idea of the root cause of trauma. And especially in the relationship between trauma and our relationships, when it comes to our relationship with ourselves, trauma is leading to diseases. It's leading to diabetes. It's leading to cancer. When it comes to relationships with our team and organization, trauma is leading to what you talked about. It's causing reactionary behavior. It's causing bad relationships between those that we care about in the workplace. It's harming the relationships that we have with those closest to us in our life. And before we recorded, you talked about the relationship that trauma is having with us raising our children. And you shared that study that I want to ask you about, but already children in our world, especially school-age children right now, they already missed a year or two of education during the pandemic. We're already behind because of that. So many things, social media, children just being handed iPads, not going outside to play, not learning communication skills. More now than ever, this is needed in society, this idea of the connection between trauma and relationships. Can you tell us again, for everybody, that study when it comes to the development of the frontal lobe in children when it comes to trauma?
Yeah. In a lot of the research, you'll find that it relates right back to how the children develop in utero on. Think about it. Our bodies are 75 to 90% water. Our thoughts are electrical charges that conduct in that water. That's what water does. It conducts electricity. When a child is in gestation, the mother's psycho-emotional state, her relationship to her past, her relationship to the father, the culture of the family is her emotional states. When that mother is under deep stress or is carrying a lot of unresolved trauma herself, and she's being triggered off during the gestation of her child's blood, bones, flesh, organs, brain is being formed in the neurochemicals of the mother's womb. And that emotional pool of stress, would that not have a profound effect on the development of a child? There's brain scans that show the brain scan of like a 3-year-old child that has been deeply traumatized. Another child that has had a stable home with loving parents. The traumatized child's brain scan shows that the frontal lobes are half developed in comparison with the child that had a nurturing environment from birth on. So what we have to look at then, learning disabilities, social disabilities, language disabilities, conversational ability to be in relationship with other people successfully, all of that goes back to an underdeveloped, traumatized brain as a small child. This is why in our systems right now, in the homelessness epidemic, a lot of this is people that have been traumatized in broken families with drug addictions, and the child is growing up in that environment, which then presupposes that child is going to have brain damage, and as a consequence is going to have social damage and perhaps even mental illness as they continue to grow with the pain of their past and struggle with the stress of being able to survive in the now and in the projected future. So this is an epidemic situation that all of our society is facing. I was speaking to a friend in California, one of my clients, and he was saying, Gary, you can't believe the homelessness. Like, you can't believe what's happening in San Diego, which makes San Diego, it looks like heaven compared to San Francisco. It's just that there's so much homelessness, drug addiction, and mental illness on the streets, and no one is doing much about it. I know people are attempting to, but again, it doesn't go to the root cause. It doesn't go to where people have to resolve the trauma that causes a drug addiction, that causes a mental illness. It doesn't go there. And until we begin to start looking at how can we actually really help people, you can do this process, because I teach clients I do the big traumas, and then I teach them how to self-facilitate themselves, and they do all the compounding events of the more chronic trauma. So then the client gets the tool to manage themselves, and it's easy to facilitate. I've trained 13-year-old girls that say, I have to save my friend from suicide. They're being molested by one of their family members and they want to die. What can I do? I train them in this very simple process. They work with their friend and the child does not commit suicide.
Wow.
I haven't lost a child yet. I get flown all over the world trying to save children. I haven't lost one yet. And it's always because of unresolved trauma.
So you've worked with a lot of people with this process that I want to dive into here in a few minutes with you. Let me ask you, what does it look like? Like, what do you visibly see as a difference in the people that you work with after working with them for 30 minutes, helping them to alleviate and remove these traumas? What do you see different?
About halfway through the process, when they start, their eyes, it is an eye movement process. And no, it is not EMDR, but it's an eye movement process. What it does is, as you observe, their physiology starts to change. Their facial muscles relax. Their eyes loosen up and they flow through the quadrants effortlessly. They begin to start having color come back to their face. They generally will get a smile on their face towards the end. And then at the end, they'll close their eyes. They'll allow themselves to just relax and continue the process inside themselves. And then they'll open their eyes. I say, just open your eyes when you feel ready. They'll open their eyes. And my first question is to them, go back to that memory and tell me just what it visually looks like. And they'll go, I'm outside of it now. And I'm looking at it like an observer. And it looks like a photo in a photo album. Like I know it happened, but I don't feel like I used to. And I said, well, how do you feel? And they'll always say, I feel neutral.
Wow.
Now, this process works with a few different aspects of our biology and our neurology. I'm a master trainer of NLP in a process called HNLP. And HNLP is more advanced processes beyond NLP. And the HNLP model is kind of what I used. This process, credit to all people that added to this, but this process was the foundation of it was originally developed by Connie Ray Andreas, who used to own NLP Comprehensive, a brilliant NLP trainer. And I was a student of hers. And she, in this training, we were having lunch. And she said, oh, I just discovered this new little process called eye pattern scramble. And it worked really well. And she said she worked on one of the painters working on her house and the guy quit smoking. And I was like, awesome. So I remembered that. She didn't teach it, but I remembered her explaining the process. So I began to work with that in my coaching sessions and in my trainings and certifications. And I was using that on stage with a demo subject in a seminar for, I think it was LCSWs. And what I realized was he wasn't changing just with the eye movements. And, I'm a Leo. I hate bombing on stage. So I amalgamized a bunch of other smaller processes that I knew would fit into the process I was doing. I attempted it again and it worked. And I was like, oh my God. So the reason it didn't work the first time was because it was a recent event. The eye pattern scramble was developed for long-standing events. But this guy got up on stage because I didn't do it with content. I don't want to know the story. I don't want to know what it was. And he said afterwards, yeah, I had come home last night and my wife was in bed with my best friend. And that's what I was working on. I was like, well, no wonder it didn't work. But then when we did all the amalgamation of what now is the trauma memory solution technique, when we did that, that it worked. It just worked like a hot knife through butter. And we have to remember that the movement of the eyes is very important. When an event comes into the nervous system, we generally bring it into through the three main senses: our sight, our hearing, and our sense of touch, or our emotional reaction. So as the event comes into our nervous system, we create an internal representation. So if you got a memory right now, Brandon, just get a happy memory, like the birth of your child. Get that in your head. So you went over to auditory, which is interesting, but did you also see a picture?
Oh, interesting. So how did you know that I went to auditory?
Because your eyes went over to the auditory remembered channel. So
wow.
What did you hear?
I heard, it's so crazy you say that, because I heard my son crying as soon as he was born. And I saw him with my wife on the hospital bed looking at them in the same place I was sitting in the actual moment.
So the way that the memory, your reference database, is logged into your nervous system is in pictures, in sounds, and in feelings. When you see the image or hear the sound, you get the emotional state. It's all logged into your database. So it's pictures, sounds, and feelings. When people are looking up, they're sorting for visual images. When they look laterally, they're sorting for sounds. When they look down, they're sorting for feelings. So what actually happens is our memories, our collections, our hauntings are only pictures, sounds, and feelings that came into your nervous system, imprinted your nervous system in a very specific strategy. So have you ever asked a person a question and their eyes do like this? They go,
all the time.
Right. Those are eye pattern strategies to retrieve the data that you're asking them. That's very useful, because once you understand that there is a system that the nervous system utilizes to bring the data forward or the memory forward in its full representation, then we can work with it. So what I do is I have them access the memory. I build up all kinds of resources that match the five senses. I have them symbolize it, and with colors, sounds, tastes, smells, and visuals. What happens then is they get the memory. They have them move their eyes to the 6 points of the eye pattern chart, and then we flood that image with the representations of all their resources over and over and over and over again. What happens is that the person, their nervous system, because we have the memory activated and they're moving their eyes in random directions, what happens is we scramble up the eye pattern accessing for that particular haunting memory. We overlay it with all of their resources, and the subconscious mind, 90% of you, takes vivid sensory specific imagination as fact. So what we do is we scramble up the accessing file, and then we can positively contaminate the haunting image that represents the memory until they cannot get it back again. And it happens in anywhere from 10 minutes to 30 minutes. And then the memory, and this is permanent. This is a permanent change. I just got a testimonial yesterday, which tripped me out, from a guy I worked with 15 years ago in San Francisco. And he wrote me on LinkedIn and said, Gary, I've never told you this. You don't remember me, but you worked with me 15 years ago at a company in San Francisco. And I have to tell you, that session changed my life. And to this day, my leadership and my excelling in my career has tripled what it would have been without that process and without you doing that for me. And just thanked me. And I was like, well, this is timely. So what I'm going to say to you is the process is simple. You have to learn it. There's very specific techniques and things I haven't mentioned that go into the process, but it's easy to learn. And the best part of it is you can self-facilitate yourself. I started this whole year, I made a list of all the things I hadn't worked on yet. There were 40 minor compounding traumas. And I did like 2 or 3 a day until the list was done. My level of peace has become so much more profound. And my success as a consequence of that has literally doubled this year.
Wow.
This year, it's doubled because I've become way more fearless, way more productive. And I will say I'm doing things now that I've always wanted to do that I didn't have the courage to do before. We only allow the level of success to come to us that we feel worthy of receiving. And if we carry all this stuff from our past with us, our self-worth is lowered. Hands down, it's lowered. If you find that you know that you have the capacity, you know you have the desire to excel, but you don't, and you don't understand why, which that kind of self-deprecating wondering lowers your self-worth even more until you end up feeling like you have to either anesthetize yourself with alcohol, anesthetize yourself with party drugs, anesthetize yourself with sex or food. All it is, it's the pain of your past that goes unresolved, that stops the energy of who you've come here to be and what you're capable of actually achieving. So this one process, I know it sounds simplistic, but I think it is, that we can lower that kind of pain of our past. Our self-worth begins to rise because we're actually investing in ourselves. And when that happens, you have more energy to do what you never thought you were capable of doing, or what you were too afraid of doing, or your sense of my fear of success or my fear of failure goes out the door because you have more energy. I look at it this way, Brandon, that in Chinese medicine, it says we have only so much qi, or life force, in our bodies. And this is why acupuncture is so powerful, because it opens up the thousands of rivers in our bodies that are called meridians, that are the energy centers that run through our bodies. So where there is a blockage in the meridian, you have disease. Where there is stagnation, you have disease. So this is the most important process that we can really learn, is how to open up, because our subconscious mind, 90% of us, a lot of it is being used to suppress what's happened to us from the past so we don't become overwhelmed. It protects us from that. And slowly it rises up to consciousness, those things that we have to deal with. So if we had our subconscious mind, our chi, not suppressing our past, but having it free flow because we don't need to suppress it anymore because we've resolved it, we've got that much more life force to achieve what we've come here to do.
Wow. So many questions I have for you. So it sounds like what you're saying at a very, very simplistic level is we have these experiences from our past, and we have good experiences, we have traumatic experiences, but regardless, those experiences are a form of programming in our mind and our psyche. And what this process does that you've created is help us to reprogram our minds, even reprogram things we didn't know were there, in order to experience more peace, joy, fulfillment, and to invite more success into our life.
Absolutely. And this is one of the most interesting parts of it, because when I certify people, I teach them how to resolve trauma and how to resolve the associated beliefs generated from the trauma. So it's a twofold system. We release it from our nervous system, and then we resolve the limiting beliefs generated by the trauma. So if you notice that people look out of a lens of their collective experience, and again, I'll say, if your lens is clouded by unresolved hauntings from your past, and we all have them, and then coupled with that, you have the extra filter of the beliefs, people will not allow themselves to go to the next level of their possibility because of their own limiting beliefs about themselves. Those beliefs just don't show up out of anywhere or out of nowhere. They show up because of core events that happened, and we create constellations of beliefs. Changing beliefs is a twofold process. One, you have to resolve the traumatic event where that belief was generated, because you can think, oh, I'm going to do affirmations and I'm going to write out my goals and it's all going to be good. But if inside emotionally you feel stifled, stuck, or afraid, no matter what you do, you're not going to go forward because that emotion has not been resolved.
Let me ask you, how many people that you work with understand and they know of the traumatic experience they want you to help them with, versus the people who don't necessarily have a traumatic experience, but you still bring them through this and help them resolve something that they didn't even know was there? And I ask that because, let's say you're speaking with me, right? I know that there's always things to work on. And if you asked me, Brandon, what was a traumatic experience that you had in your past? I had a great upbringing. I truly can't think of one pinpoint experience. Sure, I've had tough times in my life, but I can't think of one pinpoint experience that I can look back to and say, this left a disempowering imprint on my psyche. How would you then bring me through that process as someone who doesn't have a conscious memory of a traumatic experience?
That's a great, great question. What I know is that each one of us, when we think of the word trauma, because we're programmed by that word to think about, oh, it's a car accident. It's like I got beat up, or I got sexually assaulted, or something of that nature. And we think, oh, that's a trauma. They have proven scientifically that the look on a mother's face and her newborn child witnesses that look, and the look is of stress, that child will go into a form of PTSD. So we have mild traumas compounding throughout our lives. We have to start looking at trauma differently. It is not necessarily these big, huge events. Sometimes it can be a rejection from a teacher. It can be someone who has shamed us. It can be a brother who picked on us, or a sister who shamed us, or belittled us, or guilted us. It could be any one of those things. In fact, oftentimes, when people have less traumatic, deep traumatic events, their nervous system is so unaccustomed to those types of events that happen where they're not loved and they are rejected and they are discarded, that it might not necessarily happen in their families. It can happen outside their families. So if you really look at when you walk through your life, because you've been doing leadership work and you've been looking Be Better work for a long time. And if you look at what drove you to this, what actually events in your life said, this is where I want to land my career. This is what I want to do with my life. Those drivers don't come out of nowhere. They came because you had experiences that you said, we can do better. We can be better. We can have more happiness. Something drove you to be in the career that you're in. What made you decide to do this? What events in your life shaped this?
I would say my own ignorance on the idea of personal development. And that ignorance led me to being, I was a fat kid my entire life. So like I tell the story a lot, but I grew up in a household where there was always chips, there was always cookies, baked goods. I ate whatever I wanted. I was always this fat kid. And it led to these feelings of I'm not good enough. It led to this idea that I couldn't lose this weight. I was just always destined to be this fat kid. And it took for a person to come into my life in my early 20s, because I would lose weight and then I would gain it back. I would lose it. I would gain it back. It was this roller coaster. And I always said, okay, this is just how my life is destined to be, until this person said, Brandon, you've got to make a change, right? He's like, you want to become a leader in this company. You're not going to do so until you start working on yourself. And he gave me a book called The Secret, which taught me about the law of attraction. And he took me under his wing, brought me to the gym with him. I worked on myself physically. And then by working on myself physically, the emotional changes happened as a result. So now that I explained the story, it's clear that there are certainly small compounding traumas, especially with that new definition that you painted on that word trauma.
That's exactly right. So now you know how I get to it. You know? how I help people uncover it, because you probably had this beautiful life in your family, but then when you got outside the family, you recognize that the life you had within the family created certain habits that made you less socially acceptable outside the family.
No doubt. No
And
doubt.
that's where all the shame and all the trauma will come from, is that part of not being part of the tribe or accepted or loved unconditionally. It would have been a huge shock to your system as a kid to go into kindergarten and have people make fun of you or not be kind to you in some way. So all this is where it doesn't have to be these monstrous traumas. It can be these smaller events that happen to us, but it's the limiting beliefs that we form. You form the limiting belief of, I'm not good enough. There's something wrong with me. I must be broken in some way.
Yeah.
And you had an addiction because what you would do is you would eat to squelch the pain.
Mm-hmm.
And so it became, this ever-ending cycle of fear and rejection and abandonment and discardment, and then the addiction of feeding and stuffing the actual emotions that you were feeling. All this goes right back to what I've been speaking about. Every iteration of whatever we're experiencing, from drug, alcohol, food, sex, all those addictions are driven by unresolved traumas. And if we're going to be actually the best we can be, because personally, I think we're all here to do something amazing that only each one of us individually can do, we have to wake up. We have to wake up on how we formed ourselves to be us, how we formed the model of the world that we see and we interact with daily. And it will go back to core events occurred to us, to our nervous system. We made up something about ourselves and about life from those core events. And those are running like an aquifer underneath our consciousness, driving behavior, creating ramifications to us physically, in our relationships, and in our careers.
Does your book go into this process? And can you give us a glimpse of your book? The title, is it out yet? When does it release?
I'm going to release it the first quarter of next year. What I'm doing is I'm building this training out, not the certification, but teaching people how to self-facilitate. I'm building that out on Kajabi, and I'll be doing that in November. Then I'll launch that, and then I'll do the book, because I want to be able to drive people from the book to the training. One thing that I've always believed in, if you're going to put out some body of information, you better make it a complete package so people can actually learn it rather than just read about it. So my intent is to change millions of lives before I kick off, which hopefully will be another 20 years or so. But I want to be able to make as large of a contribution as I can. And that will be evergreen, and people can go to it for eternity as long as there's an internet. So that's what my objective is. And I have a timeline that I'm accomplishing all of that. So the book will come out probably first quarter. I'll have that training up on Kajabi probably by December.
And you're already bringing a group of people through the certification as we speak.
Right. I launched a internationally recognized certification. Our certifying body is an umbrella company in Australia, because we're an international company. Our headquarters are in Perth, Australia, and I operate out of Dallas. And what I know is that we developed, much through the actually great work and brilliance of my business partner in Australia, the company became an RTO, which is a registered training organization through the government of Australia. So all of our trainings are internationally recognized because they've been vetted. So this particular training, the trauma memory solution technique certification, is under the RTO of the Business Education Institute. And it is a training that will, I'm gearing it towards coaches, towards executives, towards people that are in-house coaches within organizations, to come and train up in this body of work, and to help people, as many as you can, to increase their performance, help lift the lid off of what they're suppressing, and help them show up authentically when pointedly aligned to the success of the organization and the team, and to be able to create functional teams that can move projects forward at lightning speed. That's my goal. And then to help coaches work with their clients in a way that can change a client's life in one session. If you want word of mouth referrals, that's how to do it. You can't do it just talking to someone about how they have to, do this differently or do that differently. You have to go to the root cause of why they don't do it, help them get the emotional well-being to do it. And then it's like they're winning and they're changing.
I've been telling you for a long time, Gary, that I want to be a part of one of these programs. If you remember the conclusion of our conversation a year ago, I said, I'm looking to go deeper into these learnings. And you said, I can help you. Right. And I want to be a part of one of these programs. So I'm very excited for when the door opens for that, because I'll be your first person there. 100%.
Well, I'm going to put you on my email database and make sure that you get in there and you get all the notifications of the trainings coming up, because I'm telling you, I'm on fire right now in a good way. I don't have inflammation. I'm super passionate right now because I got done with my first class last night. I went in and talked to my partner and I said, you know what? This is exactly what I'm devoting the rest of my life to.
Wow.
It's this. I am so excited and enthused to teach people this because I know the good that's going to come from it. And I'm not blowing smoke here. I am stone cold serious. People get life-changing results in one session. And they're like, I don't know how you did that. And I was like, this just came to me out of pure fear of bombing on stage. So it's not like I'm the sharpest knife in the drawer, but I am very resilient in stressful situations.
Yeah.
And this came out to be something that I want to share with the world now. And that's what I'm going to devote the next at least 10 years of my life to.
That's incredible. So for the people who are saying this is amazing and I want to get started on this before the new year, I want to get started on this ASAP to improve my relationship with myself and my relationship with others, what do you say to the person that they can do now in order to make progress forward before your book is launched?
You're backing me into a corner here. I wasn't going to do another trauma solution certification until mid-quarter next year. But I'll say this. If enough people want to do that certification, then I would consider doing one in late November. Because it's 16 hours of training. I generally do 2 hours in the evening for 2 days of the week, 1 week, and then 4 hours on Saturday. The following week, 4 hours, 2 hours each evening on 2 different days, and then another 4 hours on a Saturday. Yeah. This gives people the ability to learn the process and practice it over and over and over again with the different students in the class.
Cool.
It's a working training. It's not just like I'm going to give you information. No, you're going to be doing it. You'll be participant and you'll be facilitator over and over and over again. I just want people to leave the trainings with excellence. But if people were interested enough, I would consider doing one in late November, and that would be how do they contact me? I would send off an email to my team, which is support@peopleistic.com. And Peopleistic is spelled PEOPLEISTIC.com. So support@peopleistic.com.
That's great.
Send an email there and say, I'm interested in a November training for trauma. And if I get enough people that say that they're interested and willing to commit, I'll do it.
How many people do you like to have in a training?
I generally don't like to have any more than 20.
Okay.
And so if people want it, and there's a demand for it, take action, because I find that over 20, I don't say I lose focus, but I feel like 20 is a manageable group because I dive deep and I don't leave anybody behind.
Sure.
And with more people, someone will fall off into the cracks somewhere, and I won't permit that in my trainings. So I just focus, and 20 people are kind of where I want to land.
Is there a place where people can join your email database so they know when your book is launching?
Yes. All they have to do, again, is send their email to support@peopleistic.com.
Okay.
And say, add me to the database.
Okay. Great. So you heard it, guys. There's links in the description too to make that easy for you. So you can just click a link, and I'll put Gary's email down there as well, the support email, so you can let him know that you're interested in the book and or the trainings, because I know I'm interested. And like I said, I'm always looking for that next strategy or process that can take me to my next level personally, professionally. And I don't even know what I'm blocking myself off to right now by not practicing and utilizing these systems. So Gary, I'm always blown away by our conversations, because you give information and you go deep in a way that maybe a few people on the podcast have. And that's why I knew I wanted to have you back. You're one of the few return guests. I know I'm going to have you back a third time, especially once your book launches. And I'm really excited to have that next conversation with you, sir, and to work with you personally. So thank you for coming back on the show.
Oh, it's always such a joy and pleasure to meet with you, Brandon. I want to say you're one of my favorite people that I have done podcasts with. And I think it's because we have this really kind of soul connection. And that's what I kind of live for, is these kind of connections. So I want to thank you and the listening audience as well. And yeah, keep supporting Brandon, because he's awesome. And get this podcast out to as many people as you can, so more people can learn. And we'll go from there. And God bless you, Brandon. And all blessings to your new child. And it's going to be a great ride for you. And he's a very lucky little boy to have you as a dad.
Thank you so much, Gary. It's been a pleasure, sir. I'll talk to you soon.
Okay. Ciao. Bye-bye.
You know, when I expected to have this conversation with Gary, and we were talking about mastering relationships, we're talking about what's the key to relationships, I expected the answer to be communication, because that is generally the answer that people give as the number one skill when it comes to relationships with yourself and other people. And he threw me for a loop when he said trauma. I did not expect it. And it led to a fascinating conversation on how trauma operates in our life, and even ways that we are unknowing of, ways that we're not conscious of. And I hope that the same was true for you. And I hope that you take this information, you start using it now, even if it's just awareness that there are background forces in our own psyche that are mapping out our next moves or preventing us from taking those next moves and moving forward. And I sure hope that you pick up Gary's book when it comes out next year. Be sure to go to the description. You'll find the link for Gary's email to let him know that you're interested in the book and or his trainings, so that you can be the first to know when the next training and his book comes out. If you took even just one thing away from this conversation, please share this show with just one other person who could use it as well. We don't run ads. We don't have sponsors, because we don't want to interrupt the interview, and we want to just bring you the strategies that will help you to change your life. Thank you for being the best part of the Be Better team. And until we talk again next time, continue to be better.